alternate intro song is probably seen better days.
I would not know that.
Okay.
It's very faint, by the way. My audio with you is good, but I could barely hear that music.
Oh, no, you won't. I mean, that's the old story. I mean, I was just, with this wonderful high-tech operation I got, I was holding headphones up to the bone phone here, so, no, that's okay. It's out there, and, but I did notice it's starting to skip a little bit, and it's done its service, and it's almost reached the end of the road here. Now, with us today, back for, I guess, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times, is Dr. Ellen Lacter, and she's going to speak to us about something that's not really all that pleasant, but it's got to be dealt with. People have to know what is going on out there. We can understand why most people would shield themselves from wanting to know about it, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't. Dr. Ellen Lacter, thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks, I'm happy to be here.
I can't understand why, but we're glad you're here.
I want to get the word out.
Well, and I'm really glad you did this. It was something on my mind, and until you sent the email to me earlier today, I was happy to see that you've set up a website unto yourself. It is www.endritualabuse.org. And not that the other site wasn't good, but it was very labyrinthine. But this one, it's you got everything out there, and the way it's compartmentalized, you get right down to it. When did you put that up, by the way?
A few months ago.
All right, and I'm sure you felt the need for it, but anything in particular that made you move to segment yourself so that it was just what you do, unto yourself?
Well, the other one was mostly my own stuff, too. This one is just more easily accessible because the web address is something you can remember.
Yeah, the other one was exceptionally long, and that is a problem, yeah.
Right.
But all the information on that website was, for the most part, yours. I thought you shared it with perhaps some other individuals, but I'm not right about that.
No, that was my website.
Okay.
I've always posted Diana Napolis's Ritual Abuse Archive, and she updated it. So I think that's actually why I improved the website, because I wanted people to be able to find that archive more easily.
And they will do that. So that was a good move, and I'm glad you made that adjustment.
Yeah.
All right, now, for a lot of people who have been not with us for the whole 5.5 years, would you talk about what you got involved in? And I'm going to ask you also once again why you got involved with it. A lot of now you're a clinical psychologist, is that true?
That's right.
You could have gone into a lot of other things and made some heavy duty hay, and you could have skated away. You got in something that is extremely serious. We're happy. You're one of our heroes, but why did you do it?
Well, I think most people who work with trauma will eventually run into cases of ritual abuse, and if their minds are open enough to hear it, if they haven't been influenced to believe that it's not true by the False Memory Syndrome Foundation and the media campaign that the FMSF launched, then they will be able to understand that this happens to people, and they will create a space for that to be expressed in the therapy, and they will run into it.
But, I mean, this is not, the average type of, shall we say, disorders. This is coming from something that has greater implications. What I would assume that most people in your field, and most people in general, don't want to get near. So why did you get into the heavy-duty stuff and not just skate away and perhaps get into another field?
Well, when you have a ritual abuse survivor, and as a therapist, most trauma therapists kind of increase their tolerance for painful material as they do the work, and when you hear somebody talking about this kind of abuse, which is just so awful and so painful, most therapists are going to care about it and are going to not be able to turn away from it. I guess what's different about me is that I'm willing to be public about the fact that I know that this is real. I'm not intimidated by the threats of lawsuits or, the things that have happened to other therapists, like, dead cats left on in front of their office door or things like that. That hasn't happened to me. I haven't had any physical things done to me, but I have had newspaper articles written about me to try to, I believe, to try to discredit and intimidate me, and that doesn't work. So it's my publicness about it, but there are thousands and thousands of therapists who know that this is real. They're just more quiet about it.
Well, it begs the question also, if you've got, and this is interesting because it's institutionalized, if you got, say an editorial from a newspaper or maybe even a hard news piece, supposedly written that was critical about what you do or what your profession does, I mean, what are they thinking about? And whom or what are they protecting?
Right. Well, I mean, in 2002, Mark Sauer in the San Diego Union Tribune wrote a piece extremely critical of the fact that I was doing a little 3-hour workshop on psychotherapy with ritual abuse survivors. And many people read that article and asked the same question that you just asked. What is his agenda, and why is he writing a whole newspaper piece about a little workshop? In fact, a local sociology professor, PhD, at one of the universities in San Diego, who had read all of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation's pieces saying that all of this is made up and there's no such thing as ritual abuse and all of that, she read that newspaper article and she realized there must be more to it for somebody to come against it so strongly.
Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking, too. And, I mean, not to say that this is the same, but it reminds me of the episode with the Franklin cover-up when you had, I believe, the publisher of an Omaha daily that was involved in some, shall we say, some rather tawdry activities and was called out and, of course, did the best that he could to make sure that he stonewalled the investigation, which, in the end, nobody won. But I think it was pretty clear what exactly happened. So here you have another situation. I'm not saying it's exactly driven by the same, I guess, power structure, which would be the publisher of the newspaper. But to put, the force of a newspaper behind something like this, I find that rather interesting because most people would, I guess, claim that newspapers are too liberal. And here you had a situation where, they put their force behind what they had to discredit whatever was going on there. And so, again, I mean, you cannot, I know, Doc, you can't go back and say, there's something going on there, there's a skeleton in that closet. But you have to really wonder why, they wouldn't at least, did they ever do even any kind of supposed even, balanced, objective news story on this whole situation?
No, I mean, there were, I know 18 people who wrote letters to the editor, about his piece because it was so extremely biased and sort of threatening. And all of those people's letters, or at least most of them, got turned over to Mark Sauer instead of, none of them got published, and they were all given to him, which is, really unethical because when people write letters to the editor, it's supposed to stay with the editor. It's not supposed to go to the news department. It's not supposed to go to the writer of the article. So a lot of people have asked the same question that you're asking right now. Why would the newspaper do that? Are they somehow wanting to suppress this information about the reality of ritual abuse? A lot of people are convinced that Mark Sauer is specifically trying to suppress that reality, and then people have asked, well, what about the newspaper? What's their role in it?
Yeah, obviously, if this is one man's crusade, so to speak, that is not what journalism is about. And even if it is, I would think, or at least in the old days, you would have some kind of counterpoint view that was also put out there. That didn't happen. And of course, honestly, it's supposed to be that way. It doesn't happen any longer. It's very clear it doesn't. So it's not a surprise that would happen. Now,
you're talking about so much of the media is kind of controlled by interest groups right now.
And really doesn't allow for a vigorous debate. So, in other words, if they came out as they had, but then somebody else came out, let's say, yourself, whether it would be a guest writer or somebody from their own staff, just to give the other side of the question, if you would, or the issue, maybe there was a time when it happened a little bit. Now it doesn't happen any longer.
Yeah, I have the same feeling that there's a lot... that the press is not what's it called, the fourth estate or the fourth
the Fifth Estate.
The Fifth Estate. Yeah, it's not working.
No, and I think it may never happen in our lifetime, so that's another issue for another day. The other thing that's interesting also is a debate that's been going on about those who have grabbed the bully pulpit with regard to radio shows and Clear Channel and such, where you get so much what they would call, right-wing rhetoric, and then it's like, well, why don't we hear more from the left-hand side? And it's like, well, let them go ahead and get shows and pay for it. I mean, I can understand why a network wouldn't want to necessarily give air to both sides. They did once upon a time, but they don't any longer. So now, people just grab a network and they pitch it to one side or the other. That's really not journalism. I'm not really sure we ever had it, but that's another thing that's going on today. But for those of you, like yourself, Doc, who are involved in situations that, really nobody wants to come to light. I mean, getting any kind of, I guess you would say, investigative work done on it is a few and far between. Now, I had asked you off mic if you had ever read or had any kind of, I guess had done any kind of work at all with regard to the book Harvest of Women that was written by, I guess, Valdez Washington. I may have that name wrong. You are aware of what took place, and that was in the Matamoros state in Mexico, right?
I'm vaguely aware of the case. It's one of the, cases where the ritualistic elements of a crime were very well documented. Yes.
And nothing ever really seemed to go that far. And she was a fine guest, but myself and most people were left feeling that there was something more there. But Lord knows if she ever would want to come up top with it. I mean, I didn't challenge her on it, but there seemed to be something more there that she could just go so far with, and that, of course, like I said, is an assumption. Again, it's a very difficult field to go the whole 9 yards with. For yourself, though, I mean, when did you take this turn to be involved in this part of the profession? In other words, I mean, we talked and kind of kiddingly before about, I guess, your early days, I guess, in the New York metropolitan area. Were you aware of that situation back in the 70s when you were back up in the Northeast?
No, I wasn't. In fact, in the mid-70s, I don't think people were very aware of child abuse. I think we were mistaking a lot of post-traumatic stress for severe mental illness like schizophrenia. So if a person was having dissociative experiences and hearing, voices or threats or crying inside their mind, people didn't consider the diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder. Flashbacks were more likely to be looked at as kind of perceptual distortions, and an understanding of trauma and child abuse, it wasn't there. So when I think back on the clients that I worked with in the mid-70s, there are a few who I'm now convinced that they were survivors of extreme abuse, and there are a few who I believe were very possibly ritual abuse survivors. And I totally missed it, just like so many people did. In fact, years later, when I did understand trauma and abuse and understood a little bit about dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder, I was working with people who were ritual abuse survivors, but since I didn't understand ritual abuse and I didn't understand enough of it for that person, I'm thinking of somebody in particular right now, to be able to share it. And it was only when I learned about it from other clients who were more able to express it directly that I was able to kind of allow that person to tell me more, or be receptive in a way for that person to be able to tell me more. So we all missed all the dissociative symptoms and a lot of the ritual abuse trauma for years and years. Most of my colleagues have this same experience of looking back and regretting not asking the questions that would have allowed that material to surface, going back into the 80s.
Is there any kind of influence or emphasis or power brought to bear in your discipline that would like to stuff this and make believe it never happened?
Well, definitely. I mean, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, I mean, they were very, very effective in making the case for false allegations of abuse, and that recovered memories were false memories, and that dissociative identity disorder was rare, and they had such a huge effect on the media, and a lot of therapists, psychologists, and counselors and psychiatrists, instead of reading the professional literature on dissociation, they were reading the newspaper articles. And so, I mean, it's really sad to say and embarrassing, but a lot of people in our field got their education through the newspaper instead of the professional literature, because the professional literature is definitely on the side of dissociative identity disorder is real. It is not a rare condition. There's evidence of ritual abuse both in the legal arena and in the psychological arena, but a lot of people didn't read that stuff. Now, there are a few licensed therapists on the false memory side of this issue, but they are few, and a lot of them have been discredited. So, it's the overwhelming research is that dissociative identity disorder is based in severe trauma for the most part, and it is not uncommon, and that recovered memories are, for the most part, true, not 100% true, but based in trauma, and that false memories are, compared to, real memories of abuse, false memories are relatively uncommon. Not that they can't happen, but so the professional literature supports the reality of these things. But unfortunately, the media campaign had a very powerful effect, even on my profession.
I mean, is the sticking point, is the weak link in the chain, more or less, that people go after, who are going to be critical of this, is the false memory situation? Is that the thing they go after to attack, to discredit this whole situation?
False memory would be the first means of attack, and then the second would be that therapists create dissociative identity disorder. That means they would probably, instigate and try to create it in a client's mind. The claim is that if we believe in dissociative identity disorder, that we will ask leading questions that will cause clients to say, to kind of comply and say, oh, well, yeah, maybe I do have a personality inside named Harry or whatever. And that's just not the way it works.
My former partner's name was Harry, so that'll raise a hackle with a lot of people. Yes, I did have to deal with one named Harry. All right, well, I'm going to be straight with you, because, I won't say to you that in my life I haven't wondered that there's something foggy back there that, not necessarily my parents, but some episodes. And I guess I chose just to let it go and not conjure it. And that's probably a bad use of a word. That's kind of tainted also. But, truthfully, can you figure out, in a situation like 1 out of 10 or whatever, how many folks are walking around with suppressed memories that are rather unpleasant? Could you come up with a figure on that?
That's interesting.
I'm thinking it's obviously more than we think.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 1 out of 10. If 1 out of 10 people didn't have some kind of trauma that is still too hard for them to allow themselves to know.
Yep. Yeah, and now here's the good news, bad news situation. Obviously, because of folks like yourself, and those, again, in your discipline, this has come to light, and it isn't a dirty little secret. It has been, though I'm sure it is to a certain extent still. On the other hand, are we looking also at some kind of concomitant curve where more light's being shed on the situation, but the episodes are increasing? are we seeing an increase in this kind of situation of ritual abuse? Or are we just becoming more aware of it, or both?
Well, we're definitely becoming more aware of it. More and more people, more and more therapists are acknowledging it and talking to each other, admitting to each other that they have had cases that they believe were based in real experiences of ritual abuse. And, I have, through my website, so many survivors and so many therapists reaching out to me saying, I've got a client and this is what they're saying, and I do believe it because their level of fear and the way they're describing it, and it fits the clinical picture. And so, it's definitely coming out more. Is the actual
incidences?
Abuse increasing? That's very hard, obviously, for me to know, because anybody working with this is always only getting the tip of the iceberg as far as our knowledge of how much abuse has happened in the past, how much abuse is still happening now. I don't have any reason to believe it's increasing. Do I think it's decreasing? No, because ritual abuse in particular, so much of it happens within families, and the parents were raised in it, and they have personalities who were tortured. They were tortured as small children, and they have personalities that now hold the memories of that abuse and comply with their parents or their abusers' demands and commands, and so they are in those personality states continuing to do things very often to their children. Not always. There's some people who can stop it, but if they have more children, so like if they have 4 children, whereas there were only 2 siblings in the parents' generation, and now they have 4, then if they have not broken the cycle, if they have not somehow stopped the transmission of this, gotten help, or remembered and made some kind of deep decision that they weren't going to do this to their kids, if they haven't stopped it, now 4 kids are being affected. Now, I have worked with people who, I remember one person who was, let's say, in their 60s, and there were 8 siblings, and the father of those 8 siblings ritually abused those 8 siblings. So those 8 siblings all had children. Well, if it spreads out like that, and grows geometrically like that, then obviously it can grow. But then again, not everybody's having more children, and some people really are able to stop this. So I don't really believe it's increasing, but I can't know it.
Okay. Now you speak to it being not necessarily institutional or systemized. What you've been speaking to right now is the fact that this happens and it's familial. All right. Okay. What about systemic or organizational abuse, whether it's cults or whatever? Here's where I'm going. I'm thinking about growing up, and this may be just something I don't remember, or because suddenly it became a trend to do this. But I had a half a gallon of milk sitting on the kitchen table in a wax container, and there were no kids' faces on it. That's 1963, 65, 69. Now all of a sudden, not only do you see it on the milk cartons, and we call them milk carton kids, and we don't mean that pejoratively, and also we see them on flyers and all this. It's like, what's going on here? Why are kids disappearing? Has this always been happening, and now we have a heightened awareness? Or is something going on here, and these children are being not necessarily individually scapped, if you will, by some crazies, individual crazies, or is something being fed? You know where I'm going with that, and I'm not going to lead you down that road, but would you speak to the fact of what's going on with the disappearance of children, and does that, tie in, again, I think it does with ritual abuse. We may never see them again, but what about that whole phenomena?
Well, you know about the Johnny Gosch case, where he was taken, and there's lots of reason to suspect that that was cult involved and organized pedophilia involved.
Agreed.
My sense of this is that these very organized, sophisticated groups are less likely to grab American children from families now.
Because there would be a track of them, and they would be missing.
Because there'll be media attention to that, and they could risk getting caught because people will try to find those children. I think that most of the children who are abused are children within the families, because those children are so much more easy to control.
Agreed. Okay.
Now, less organized abusers may grab kids, but I don't think these are the level of organized abuser group that I'm talking about when I talk about ritual abuse.
Okay.
Not that some of those kind of solo players aren't doing some kind of individual ritual things, but I think these organized groups are less likely to grab kids these days. I think that homeless people can be victims that are grabbed for human sacrifice. Because
who's going to care? Who's going to know?
Yeah, you grab some 40-year-old man who's drunk and wandering around the city. He doesn't show up at the shelter that night.
Yeah.
There's no missing person report because he could have gone someplace else. So I have heard survivors talk about people in all kinds of dirty clothes, and they look like homeless people who they talked about being abused in rituals. I've also heard people talking about bringing in children from other places, specifically in California, often from Mexico, babies brought in, who aren't going to make it onto milk cartons in the United States.
What about, and again, I mean, we want to look at the way this can be remedied, so I'm not going to, make this whole, down, bad thing. But, I mean, again, I've often wondered if the family structure in America has at least disintegrated to some extent. Not, in every household, in every place, or whether it's suburbia or, inner city. But that a lot of children go wandering off and nobody's asking why they're gone. Is there some kind of, I guess what Durkheim would call it, anomie? I mean, there's some rootlessness, and that...
You're talking about teenagers who leave?
Yep.
Yeah.
What about it?
I don't know. Obviously that's a really big problem. I mean, a lot of homeless teens are running away from abuse at home. But I think ritually abused children who were tortured as toddlers in order to create terrified personalities who completely submit to the abusers, those people are less likely to run away.
Really?
Yeah, because they're more completely terrified into compliance.
And dependent, too, to a certain extent? Can we say that?
Say that independent?
No, dependent on their actual abusers.
I would say controlled by terror.
Okay, now, would this be an accurate assessment that children could be raised in a home where they're abused, and then, on the other hand, they're also nurtured? And so, and coddled and brought back, and then abused again, to a certain cycle where, first of all, does this happen? And secondly, if it does, do the children grow up thinking, well, this is normal?
I don't think a ritually abused child needs to be nurtured for the abuser to accomplish their goal of complete control.
So in other words, the abuser does not necessarily have to show, shall we say, a softer, kinder side?
That's right. A lot of survivors report no softer, kinder side by the parents.
So they've effectively then, the abusers have effectively created some kind of I guess, mental slavery in which the victim really doesn't get out of.
It's deliberate. Deliberate creation of personalities who continually live in the state of pain and terror that they were in during their worst abuse, and those parts live in extreme fear of that happening again. And there's so much that is done deliberately to stop them from ever remembering the kind of in the world personalities. For the in the world personalities to never remember. There's so much specific, calculated abuses done to prevent memory in the more conscious personalities, and to prevent ever telling, and to definitely prevent ever running. So it takes enormous effort for these people to break free.
Well, I'm wondering, first of all, I have two questions. One is, it seems to me, and of course this is just me looking at the top of the surface of everything, that females are the majority victim. Is that true?
I don't think so.
Really?
Maybe a little bit more females than males, but I think that the males are less likely to show up in therapy offices because
it's a masculine thing, a macho thing.
Well, no. I think that they're more likely to severely abuse substances. They're more likely to be extremely self-destructive and to get into a criminal lifestyle. They're more likely to become violent. So I think the jails are full. I think that there are a lot of ritual abuse survivors in jail. Some of the women too, obviously, but in families that are raised in these abusive theologies and belief systems, it's more likely that they're going to abuse all of their children than just some of their children.
All right, so they're not going to...
So the boys are going to get abused too.
So boys and girls, it doesn't matter. It's equal opportunity abuse.
For the most part.
Okay. Now, I've got a couple of more questions, and I'll throw it over to you in the sense that if you want to talk about certain points that you definitely want to get out and that I'm not hitting on, I want you to do that. But at this point also, at the bottom of the hour, you have the website, www.endritualabuse.org. Please, at this time, will you speak to what's out there? And also, do you have any kind of mechanism that would allow somebody to contact you, say, by email or with somewhat anonymity and say, I think I got a situation here, can you help me out? How does that work?
Well, on my website there is a contact me link. And what I've been trying to do over the last 10 or so years is create a list of therapists who work with this. So people contact me, and I try to find them a therapist who's near them.
Okay.
Because they really need a whole lot of support, and I obviously can't be the primary support for the thousands of people who contact me.
Now, I think we had spoken about this, and I'm going to ask you, please, to help refresh my memory. You came on a while ago with a woman who had written a book, and she was out of Binghamton, New York.
Lois Einhorn.
Yeah. And she was very good about saying this also. Do you folks, have you identified certain people that you are trustworthy of who can help folks no matter what region they're in? How widespread are you confident with as far as a network of analysts that could deal with people and that you would trust them? It's
interesting. When therapists refer clients to other therapists, there's actually very few therapists that any given therapist knows very well.
Right.
So, I mean, if I have a client and then that client goes to another therapist for family counseling or something, and they come back and they tell me about how it's helping and the things that are being done, then I have some real information. What I have to do is I have a list of people. Some of them I've talked to on the phone. Some of them I can tell are very, very smart. Some of them sound like their hearts are really in the right place, but I just have to tell, all of my, all the survivors who contact me that they have to kind of really try to feel out when they sit down with that person whether it feels right and use their own judgment, because I it's impossible for me to know these people, most of these people well. I know a few really well.
All right. One of the things that I remember when I had to do some research, when I went back to school for a second degree to get certified to teach, getting involved in certain psychology classes as regards education, obviously, and then within the school system. One of the things I recognize, and I don't know where this is going necessarily, but it was triggered, at least the thought about this and what you said about males and females and what's more likely to happen if they're victims of ritual abuse. Also, have you found this to be true, that most likely males will be more successful at committing suicide, though probably lower in numbers in attempts, where females may have higher attempts, but they really don't kill themselves?
Well, I think we know that statistically. I think I've read that before.
Yeah, right.
But is that true also for in ritual abuse, that the males are more likely to actually kill themselves or not? I don't know. I think that in ritual abuse, it's interesting. Very often the victims are programmed to be extremely suicidal if they ever remember, but they're also often programmed not to actually kill themselves because the abuser group does not want them dead. So what tends to happen is they have horrible feelings of wanting to do it, or impulses to do it, or thoughts about ways that they should do it, or feeling pressured to do it. But also often there's another form of programming, more deeply unconscious, that makes sure that they won't do it. Not that we can disregard the when somebody feels suicidal, we still have to take it seriously, because there still is a risk. But I wonder how many ritual abuse survivors, actually suicide or not. I don't know.
Well, last word about this, and I'll leave this because obviously, I don't mean to be a dilettante about this. But what struck me when I looked, and I actually went to the CDC and asked them for their stats, and they gave me a ream of data back in, that was 1995. And it seemed also, what was interesting to me was that females were more likely to, shall I say, injure themselves, immolate themselves, cutters and such. You don't see that much with males, you know what I mean?
Well, I don't know if that's true.
Is that right?
Within the population of ritual abuse survivors, the self-harm problem is huge, and I think it's there for both men and women.
It cuts across both sexes. All right. Well,
yeah, because they have been told that that's what they have to do. There's a lot of programming that makes them feel that they must do that. They usually have parts inside that are trying to keep other parts quiet, because their experience is that if they ever leak information, that they're going to be severely punished. So there are parts who will harm the body to prevent them from ever telling anything, as a way of stopping worse physical harm. Because when they were little and maybe they said something to a teacher or said something to a neighbor about somebody hurting them, then the abusers will escalate the abuse to make them to make sure that they'll never tell again.
Boy. Now, here's the other thing. It seems to me somewhat, logical, but that you can throw that to the wind in this situation, that people who are coming forward about what has happened have done so because of adulthood and what it does do to develop even the most, poorly wretched, destroyed soul. I mean, adulthood finally, I think, somehow, some way, makes them finally come forward. Is that true, Doc, that a lot of the folks that you deal with, or whatever percentage, only break out because now they're like in their 20s or whatever and said, enough is enough? What's the deal with that?
Well, it's interesting. I think that until recently, most people were not remembering their ritual abuse until their 30s or 40s, because I think that they needed that much strength.
Accrued through all that, the 20 years, let's say, from the time that it stopped or they got away from it?
Well, it didn't necessarily even stop. A lot of people that first recall that they were ritually abused end up finding that it's still going on. You know, very often they're still involved and don't know it. But I think that for people who are, say, only 20 years old, who have the other developmental tasks of the young 20s of having to get some degree of comfort in being an independent person and making money and, you know, fitting in the world in some way, I think all of that, despite the bravado of, you know, so many people who are 20 years old, I think that that's enough of a task psychologically that if you add on to that, you know, plus kind of personality, you know, consolidation, you know, who am I, you know, that all of that stuff, it's just much too much to add on to those developmental tasks, having to remember this level of horrible abuse. But however, on the other hand, there seems to be a trend for the first time of young people being able to look at this and process it, and even in some cases be public about it. And I think it may be because of the internet. It may be because even though the mainstream media is not really presenting this issue, there are resources available on the web. And maybe also just the publicity about child abuse in general and all the movies about child abuse and, you know, the Lifetime Network where half the films involve child abuse or domestic violence or rape or something like that. You know, I think the consciousness of our culture about abuse and trauma and post-traumatic stress and the damage that does and, you know, all of this new stuff with the clergy abuse and everything that's happening, there's like for the first time, I think, people in their 20s, and then, you know, who are getting their memories and getting help, and even some of them being activists about this. And then there's another thing that's helping, which is that more people who are in their 40s are getting help, and some of those people have 20-year-old children who were abused until they were 10 or so when the parents started getting help. So these people have a history of abuse in childhood that did stop because the parent, you know, started putting it together and broke the pattern of the abuse. And so when a parent gets help, when a parent says, you know, this happened to me and this happened to you and, you know, and we can both get better, then it makes it so much easier for the child. It makes it safe for the child to then know what happened to him or her.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a trend, too. We have, like, multiple generations going into a healing path together. So this younger generation is getting help.
All right. One of the things I want to address, and the email that you sent me went on about this in some repleteness. I have no problem with this whatsoever. But this looks at the institutional side of things. It would seem to me, and Doc, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but that we have a lot of this going on under the aegis, you know, officially or not, in certain institutions, and one of them would be in religious institutions. Do you find that to be rampant? That's a radical word to use, or do you find it to be, well, shall we say, a predominance of what goes on out there?
You know, I definitely, there's a lot of reasons for the fact that there's a lot of ritual abuse that occurs within churches. I think one of one of the reasons is that ritual abusers usually have a theological agenda. Either, that Satan's going to come back, or or some witchcraft agenda where they believe that they're going to attain eternal life by putting their spirit into their children, or variables of that. Now, some ritual abusers may be only using Satan and scary demon metaphors just as an intimidation tactic, but others have they're true believers in theologies that require abuse of other people, of children specifically, in most cases.
Yeah.
So and these theologies are very anti Judeo-Christian faith.
Okay.
Their agendas are the opposite. Well, Satanism is obvious.
Right.
It's Satan versus God, or Lucifer versus Jesus, or whatever.
Right.
Witchcraft despises abuse of witchcraft. I'm not talking about Wicca. I don't have an issue with Wicca.
Okay.
But abuse of witchcraft despises Christianity because of the Inquisition and the entire history of, rivalry, and, perhaps for other reasons. So these people who have these beliefs in Satanism or abuse of witchcraft despise Judeo-Christian institutions and want to defile them. And so they want to position themselves in those institutions in order to destroy them. And what they do in rituals on this earth actually have in their minds, a parallel effect in the spiritual world, where when they hurt a child in the name of Satan, for example, they believe that they're empowering Satan in the spiritual world. And if they can do that in a church, then they're empowering Satan even more in their warped thinking. So they like to use these institutions, they like to have positions of power in these institutions and sort of misuse them and break them down. So that's how I tend to see it, is that, and also, access to lots of children and lots of families and sites that they can use, and, so many, and probably lots more reasons I don't even understand. But I don't see these institutions these churches as, like, the Catholic Church or the Lutheran Church or any of these things. I don't see these religions as being satanic in their primary motivation. I think it's people misusing it, or even it can be clergy who are victims of ritual abuse, maybe even who went into a life in the clergy because they were looking for help. They were looking for faith in something loving as a way of helping themselves from this evil experience that they had, and then maybe in their individual cases they got stuck in the evil side and weren't able to conquer it with the loving side. So I think they go there. I don't think the Catholic Church is about Satanism. I don't think, it happens in synagogues too. This isn't restricted to Christianity. It happens across the board. It happens in the Mormon Church. It happens. There's ritual abuse happening in all of these religious institutions. Now, I understand that when people try to disclose this, the religious institution gets defensive.
Sure.
And says, well, no, not here, because, how horrible it would be to discover that there were people involved not only in their building, but members of their clergy, who were doing this. They don't want that to come out, so they've been irresponsible and defensive by, erring on the side of sort of short-sighted self-protection. But I don't see these institutions, some people might say that some of these institutions are inherently about these agendas of that require abuse of others, but I don't have any reason to believe that.
No,
myself.
I don't believe that either. I think sometimes, obviously it's famed what has been going on with the Catholic clergy, and people are saying, well, you ought to let them marry. That this stuff wouldn't happen. But I think when you're looking at abuse, it's not really about not having a mate. It's about something else, and marriage may not solve that. I don't know. That's just my guess. And I don't mean to necessarily, bang Catholicism with a stick this time around. Other times I do. But this has got something to do beyond just being married, because I think, well, as you just mentioned also, let's face it, a lot of ritual abuse victims are victims of mom and dad. So you get a family unit there, and so obviously the lack of marriage is not stopping the abuse from occurring. Is that true?
Yeah, I think I believe people are sexual beings, and I think that it does pose problems for a person to have to be completely celibate, especially if they feel that masturbation is also okay. But I don't think that that's enough to make somebody abuse somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Without a doubt. Well, as we're looking down the road here and all that is going on, what is your prognostication? I mean, do you see anything evolving in the human theater that would make you tend to believe that this trend can be abated or turned back? As you said, you're not so sure that this is something that's on the rise. For myself, on the outside looking in, and of course I'm a layman, and I got nothing to go on except just what I find in the news that I get. It seems to be, I'm seeing on the rise, even though it might be more reported. But yourself, I mean, you're in the trenches. You're there all the time. You've been there for many, many years. What is your thoughts about, let me say, where this is headed and how well you can stem the tide?
I feel that the therapists who are acknowledging this are just growing exponentially.
Okay.
There are so many people are less afraid to acknowledge it to each other. So many people are admitting that they work with this now. And the more, therapy is still the main way that people heal from this. We're still the main source of escaping any repetition of the cycle. So I think the internet has been enormously helpful, and to me, the therapeutic community is moving in a very fast, positive direction of acknowledging the reality of this.
Even if we go a little bit over the hour, one of the things I wanted to address is what you sent to me also, and this is not to put the onus on any peoples or nationality, but we do have a situation now where obviously we've had a problem, as we spoke about before in Matamoros, and whether or not life is cheaper in Mexico than it is in the United States, I won't even say that. But with human trafficking, one of the things that you did mention, this does not necessarily happen just between the three nations in the North American continent. This obviously is legion in other places. Do you want to speak about what kind, has this become an industry also where, like you said, it's human trafficking. What about this, and what kind of a problem that is it globally as far as you know?
Okay, I have not had experience of ritual abuse survivors talking to me about victims from other countries being brought into their rituals to be abused or to be sacrificed, aside from Mexico. But however, almost all ritual abuse survivors have either direct experience or witnessed experience of child pornography, and that being a huge moneymaker for these ritually abusive groups. And I have heard many survivors talk about the pornography being transported out of this country, so that if it's ever seized, it won't be victims in this country. So they talk about an exchange where, for instance, U.S. child pornography goes to Europe, and European child pornography comes here.
Right.
So that's a form of sex trafficking.
Okay.
That I know something about, but I'm really aside from more the local groups that may enslave somebody. I mean, it's sort of, there is overlap with ritual abuse, but not very much in my personal experience of what I know from survivors.
All right. So as you have to deal with people, and you've been doing this for some time now, would you say that the majority, or give me a percentage if you would, I mean, or the listeners, that is, how much would you say, percentage-wise, is in the family, is familial, and how much do you come across that is, shall we say, for whatever, under a big umbrella term, institutionalized?
Well, even when it's, it usually starts intergenerationally, in the family, but rarely is it limited just to the immediate family. Usually it involves some of the extended family, and very often it involves a group of extended families, and then in many cases it goes beyond that to, a larger group of, a hierarchy, either in a particular region or, for instance, if you're talking about child pornography, where there'll be people organizing that, among people over a wider area. And I want to correct something I said a moment ago.
Sure.
Which is that I do know of many survivors who report being taken to other countries where they were also prostituted and used for pornography in those other countries, but then brought back here. So, or brought back to wherever they started, to their family. So it's not. I haven't heard of people who. Well, I guess I wouldn't. If somebody was in this country and then they were taken by somebody or sold by somebody to somebody in another country, they wouldn't show up in my therapy office. And the people that I have in therapy are not from other countries for the most part, but they, most what I understand about human sex trafficking is that they tend to remain enslaved for quite a while.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I know it happens.
Sure.
And I know people who work with that primarily, but it's kind of just a different group of abuse survivors than the one I work with.
Now, you've been at this for some time, and you have to answer this, and you really don't. But I do wonder, because I guess I want to say I marvel at folks like yourself. If that's too strong a word, or it seems too, sensational, I will say, obviously, I admire you folks. And that's one of the reasons why, as little as I do about this, one of the things I've always done is to have you on and some other folks to speak to this. But for yourself also, Doc, other people might be thinking about this too, who work in counseling or whatever. Do you ever find yourself sliding under the bus? And if you do, what do you do to stop it? Or if you don't ever get that way, how in the world do you mentally and spiritually prepare yourself to deal with what you have to deal with?
Operationalize sliding under the bus. What do you mean?
Well,
You mean just feeling overwhelmed or depressed or?
Yes, because you're an empath, there's no doubt about it. But, I mean, I know also in the profession you have to distance yourself. I would never have learned how to do that. That's why I'm not there. I assume you folks have, and you must do that for some kind of, obviously, shall we say, protection. And so, I mean, how do you handle it? Let me just put it straight. I mean, if you want to tell us how you do that.
At the beginning, it was very hard because I was afraid.
Okay, that's fair.
I was afraid of the abusers. I was devastated by how horrible this was. And so that, like, let's say the first year or two in which I knew that this was real were definitely difficult. Now, when I hear something, some new version of torturing somebody, or manipulating, or I mean that's one of the things that really gets to me is how they plan all this stuff and carefully. I just don't scheme in that way, and how much messing with somebody's mind can be done by setting it all up so that to entrap somebody. When I hear something new and horrible, something that I would call evil, something that deliberately cruel. I have a hard time for a while in terms of feeling sickened and kind of a little. I don't get scared anymore. I get disgusted and sad, and then what I do is I walk in circles. I walk around. I wander around in the world. I go to the grocery store. I wander around. I walk. I walk and think and let myself cry a little. I'm not bawling my eyes out, tearing kind of thing. Talk to myself.
I understand that.
Synthesize it. Get used to it. And then go on. The main thing is if you feel, if you know of something horrible, but you feel like you're doing something helpful about it, then you can handle it.
Yeah.
If you feel helpless or completely ineffective, then you're depressed or frightened or nervous or something. But if you can do something positive, then you can be kind of uplifted.
That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, depression, happiness, or, whatever you want to say, are energizers. They're motivators. They're both motivators. That's the key. And if you can have an outlet, especially when you get to the side of, like you said, where it's not all fun and games, but if you feel that you're empowered enough to do something about it, even though it's not the most pleasant of situations, you will be fueled by your emotions to turn something into a positive situation. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's right. I mean, this is really, really fulfilling.
Yes.
There's no turning back. You can't say it's not real. When you know it's real, you have to deal with that. So you really have only one choice, which is, to try to do something to help it, and then you feel better. I have a really good husband. That helps a lot.
Excellent.
And I have friends who are also part of this war, this war to get the truth out, this war against the people who are trying to say it's not real, and we help each other. We talk to each other, and if we hear something new and horrible, we tell each other, and so I actually have some friends who I value very much through this work. So there's some kind of good things that have come of it.
Well, no, I mean, but you're being honest, and what you just said is probably like, well, my wife and I have gone through certain ministries at different times in our lives, but you're human beings. It's okay to be human. You can't be there and be steely all the time, and you need to be regenerated, and you need to have some kind of shall we say behaviors that let you get back into the fray. And that's what you've said. And because like I said, I mean, I honestly do marvel at you folks. And that's, I guess I don't have you folks on enough, but I can't ever forget it. And that's why I'm glad you're here, because people have to know about this. And, you know, and there is a remedy. There is a, if not a defense, you know, something that you can redress this whole situation. And, you know, I'm glad that you've come on as many times as you have. Like I said, you know, and even today, I think you've been more frank than you've ever been about what you need to sometimes, you know, regenerate your jets and get back out for another day. And that's only human, and I'm glad you said that, because that's really what people need to hear, that they can do it. They don't have to be somebody, shall we say, exceptional, but they need a certain kind of group. In your situation, like you said, a nurturing spouse and friends that are around you really mean a lot, and you can get back into it. And I don't mean to pontificate, but I mean that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, you have to do things. You have to, you know, kind of do things physically that are soothing. You have to kind of take care of your body as far as.
Yes.
I think that it's very important, you know, for survivors of ritual abuse, for everybody, but you know, particularly survivors, and then anybody who's dealing with a lot of painful stuff. You know, you have to work on feeling good physically. You know, whether that means. You know, taking a bath or, you know, going out in nature and taking a walk, or, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, heavy-duty exercise, but just taking care of your body, I think, is important.
That's right.
Doing something nurturing to your body.
Yeah, your spiritual and your physical plan is key. Otherwise, you can't go on and fight.
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what. It's been across a couple of years, and for some strange reason, you keep coming back, and I love it, and I thank you for doing so. And you brought some guests on the way also, and you've also addressed some situations that we've dealt with in emails that never got on the air. And so, folks, I want to tell you that Dr. Ellen Lacter does not blow her own horn. I'm more than willing to blow that for her, and you've seen a human side of her, and this is a very human situation. So, folks, in any way, shape, or form, I mean, I don't know that necessarily you can support her, but obviously understand that she's there. And Doc, I tell you what, obviously you mean a lot to me. I would not have asked you. I mean, this is not actually an accolade. I mean, who cares about me? But, I mean, as I find my way to the exit, I just really wanted you back on again. I've gotten your emails through time with, you know, questionnaires and stuff. But the last time out, when you sent something, I said, you know, I just really would like to hear from her again. And you've done that, and I want to thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you for giving me a chance to, you know, tell people about this, because the more people that are willing to hear this, the more survivors are going to be able to overcome all that programming to never tell, and they're going to be able to get better. If the world just opens their minds and their hearts to this, people will be able to, it will beat the bad guys.
In this situation, you know, I'm pretty much a realist and a pessimist, but you know what? In this kind of situation, if you turn the light bulb on and shed a lot of light in this darkness, you know what? This is probably one of the sectors in life, not only in the United States but globally, where things can turn to the better.
That's right.
And I'm glad you're there on the front lines, and I want everybody to understand that she is. And I thank you so much for coming on. And even if we do not talk on the air again, I'm kind of thinking we'll be in touch if you don't mind.
Yes, I would. I would like that very much, and thank you so much.
One last thing. Is it Summit Avenue?
Summit Avenue.
Summit Avenue in Hackensack. Was that?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I've got to Google that.
You go back
I'll Google map it and get back to you.
And folks, you don't care about that, but yeah, go check it out. I had an epiphany. I'm going, Summit Avenue. All right, Doc. God bless you out there, and you and yours. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.